Thanks so much to our conversationalists, Julia and Bernie, for that very important conversation. Something we take it for granted, but we know that there are many things that we need to be aware of. On Monday, we had a great panel focused on PAT, or psychedelic-assisted therapy. And now we're going to extend that conversation with a discussion about the breakthroughs with psychedelics through the lenses of federal policy, data analytics, and the practice of providing healing. I love the name of this panel, Fortitude of the Feminine, Veteran Women in Psychedelics. Please welcome to the stage Jessie Gould, founder of CEO Heroic Hearts Project, and our esteemed panel.
So welcome, everybody. I know I'm not what you expected when you heard Fortitude of the Feminine, but I'll do my best. Unfortunately, I'm joined by some amazing guests, and so I'll introduce them real quick. So to my right, we have Kristin Rosie Barnes, naturopathic doctor and chief medical officer of No Fallen Heroes Foundation. Natalie Lupiani, vice president of Benison Strategy Group, and Juliana Mercer, Director of Veteran Advocacy and Public Relations for Healing Breakthrough. So quickly, I want to differentiate this from just being an advocacy or just being informing view of psychedelics. So earlier this year, I'm sure many of you remember, there was this moment when all of us were paying attention to AI, right? The ChatGPT just came out, and all of a sudden around the country, there's this discussion on how this could change our jobs, how this could change the future, how this could change our interaction with technology. And where psychedelics come in is it's just as significant a breakthrough just for mental health. These are not just substances that are more effective. These are substances that will really cause us to change our perspective on how we interact with each other, how we treat mental health, and even how we test and analyze and utilize medication, drugs, and psychotherapy in the future. And so very honored to have this esteemed panel with me. So first of all, I'd like you all, these are all veterans here, so go over your military experience briefly for the audience, as well as what you're doing in this space to push psychedelics forward. So Kristin, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Jesse. Kristin Rosie Barnes. I was an F-14 backseater. For those of you who are familiar, that's Goose from the original Top Gun movie. I did that for about 15 years. I've been in every major combat operation that we've supported with aircraft carriers since Bosnia. I retired in 2015, and I knew I needed to continue serving after 23 years of active duty, so I ended up getting my naturopathic doctorate degree from a school in Seattle, along with a master's in Oriental medicine, so I do acupuncture as well. And it wasn't enough to just get these degrees and go on to do primary care. In Seattle, we see a lot of homelessness and mental health issues and drug addiction, opium addiction. I wanted to take the skills that I was learning and working with those populations and apply it to the veteran community, because that's really where my heart lies. And in the psychedelic space, it just so happens that I've been introduced to psychedelic medicine through my colleagues in naturopathic medicine. It's plant medicine, we use plants. And so ended up getting into it for my own personal reasons, which got me in contact with No Fallen Heroes and Matthew Buckley, who is a former fighter pilot. And what we do with No Fallen Heroes is we take veterans and we sponsor them to send them out of country to do psychedelic retreats in the treatment of PTSD and trauma. And our goal eventually would be, let's have that in the United States. Nothing against Costa Rica, it was lovely, but I'd really love to treat American veterans on American soil. And so that's what we do. Going forward, it would be nice to see not just veterans, but if we can start there, then at least we can paint the picture of what this is going to look like for other fields. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Natalie Lupiani. I'm an Air Force veteran. I served from 2000 to 2009, both on active duty and in the Air National Guard in the state of New York. I left my service as a weather forecaster with PTSD that went untreated for a very long time. It took a lot of struggling through my civilian transition to realize that I needed help and to ask for that help. And I'm here today because I got that help. But I do believe that there are great treatment options available from psychedelic therapies, psychedelic-assisted therapy, that will help my brothers and sisters in arms. Over 20 per day do not need to die by suicide. So anything that we can do to improve, the current status quo is something that I will be happy to work for. So today, in my civilian career, I am a pollster and a strategist. I am able to help my clients with really big questions in big crises. And so what I am proud that I'm able to do now is take a look at psychedelic therapy through the lens of public opinion and voter support, and inform some of the decisions and the communications that supporters and advocates of psychedelic-assisted therapy have to say to the public to gain greater awareness and greater support.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Juliana Mercer. I served in the Marine Corps from 2001 to 2016, a combination of active duty and reserve, deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan, and had the honor of spending 5 years at the Naval Hospital in San Diego, working at the Wounded Warrior Battalion with Marines that were coming back from combat with injuries ranging from missing multiple limbs to traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress. That work allowed me to transition into the veteran nonprofit space once I left uniform. My mission then is still my mission now, but it was to help veterans not fall into what I called the black hole, helping them to thrive post-military, doing everything and anything that we could get our hands on to help. And we did try everything. We tried surf therapy and puppies and equine therapy and regular talk therapy, medications. Nothing really moved the needle. In fact, the needle has been moving in the wrong direction. The JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, just a couple weeks ago published a report that since 2006, that's the year that I started working with our wounded, the veteran suicide rate has increased tenfold for veterans with brain injuries. And it's been really frustrating not having a real solution. Through that work, through my own trauma, the collected trauma of my brothers and sisters, my entire 20s and 30s, our country and my friends being at war, I eventually found myself in a place with no purpose. And thankfully, because of my nonprofit connections, I met Jesse Gould and was able to go on a psychedelic retreat. And that totally changed my life, got me to a place where I was able to continue doing the work that I was doing in helping veterans. But it also gave me a renewed spirit to do this because there was finally a solution. This psychedelic therapy is the big, huge light at the end of the tunnel for me and for many others that have been working on trying to find solutions for the veteran suicide epidemic. So I'm happy to be here and share with you all.
Thanks, Juliana. Thanks, everybody. So this panel is called Fortitude of the Feminine. And just as much as mental health is changing with psychedelics, the military itself is changing. And there can be a lot of back and forth on that, but even when I got out, there now are abilities for women to be in combat roles. There now are ability for women to be in special operation roles, and that's a pretty significant change. There were that before, but they had to kind of figure out various ways to get that. And then the other dynamic too is oftentimes as a culture, when we hear veteran, we have this very uniform sort of view of a male person with all this kit and and that, but that's not the case. I think it's around 27% of the armed forces is female soldiers in various capacities. So since this is part of the theme of this panel, what would you all like to share with the audience about the female veteran experience, and also going into how this psychedelic landscape does tend to be more inclusive, and what do you think the female voice can really offer that, if anything? Juliana, we'll start with you.
Sure. So female veterans are less inclined statistically to voice that they're veterans when they're applying for jobs, when they're talking to people in their community. We leave the service with, I don't want to call it shame, but with not the amount of pride that men leave the service with. And we can go down a really deep rabbit hole as to why that is. But women detach from the military, where our male counterparts have more of a community with their veteran brothers and sisters. And we detach, and that problem of detachment is the problem that causes that black hole, to falling into that black hole. And so we're more prone to be alone, and women are more prone to experiences that can cause post-traumatic stress because of domestic and physical violence. Women in our country and our world suffer from higher rates of PTSD than our male counterparts, and that's an even higher rate in the military. So recognizing that, but also recognizing that we're very quiet about our service, and we suffer quietly. One of the things that my psychedelic experience allowed me to do was give myself credit for the trauma that I had in fact experienced. I think one of you mentioned I didn't give myself credit, or I didn't realize that I had that baggage that I needed to release. And veterans are really good at one-downing instead of one-upping. We say, well, I have all of my limbs, I have a stable job, I'm okay. And we don't give ourselves the credit for what we actually are carrying. And we can't let that bag go until we give ourselves the credit and recognize it.
Thanks.
Yep.
Natalie?
Yeah. So Juliana, you mentioned that women really aren't seen as veterans coming out, and don't kind of consider themselves or refer to themselves as veterans coming out, and that's so interesting, because as much as I wanted to have the world kind of recognize my identity as a veteran, the best advice I got when I was, looking for my first job was to take that military experience down from the top of my resume. And I don't know how many male veterans have gotten that advice, but I took it and I started getting calls back. So I think, this really touches on something that you already spoke about as well, but I think what people don't really understand is moral injury is something that gets talked about in the context of someone fighting a war that they maybe don't agree with, but there is more moral injury than that in the military, and women coming out of military service are very likely to have some degree of moral injury simply due to serving in a capacity and a role in an institution that isn't designed for them, and in a lot of spaces does not want them there. And so that experience is very, difficult to contend with while you're in the service, and it leaves you with some really complex emotions to unpack and, find space for after you've left. So I do think that that's something that I wish was a bit more discussed, a bit more talked about. I do also have a great deal of hope for psychedelics, because I believe that they can address those bags, those unpacked bags, in a way that more traditional therapies and medications cannot. So I do believe that for women in particular, there really is a lot of hope and a lot of promise and a lot of relief that psychedelics can offer.
Absolutely. And I think there's a reemergence of community too, to where for instance, this panel can come together and talk about these things and bring the voice out. Kristin, what about your perspective?
Community is a great segue because that's really what I found through psychedelic medicine, because I did the same thing that Juliana talked about, where I didn't even have a retirement party. I spent 27 years total, 23 active duty, and I didn't have a retirement party because I felt like nobody's going to come anyway. And what is that? People don't recognize women veterans. They aren't able to see that we are much more than what is on the recruiting ads for the Marine Corps, the Navy, Air Force, et cetera. And so psychedelics, at least personally, has been a way for me to develop that community and connect and reach out in ways that I was never, ever able to before because of the biases in our culture and my own baggage that I brought to the table. I think as a woman veteran in this space, my goal is to help create the infrastructure rather than try to fit into something that's already been made with a very male-centric model. And if we build that from the ground up, I think it's going to be better served all around to have both sets of energies at the table helping to heal. And not only that, but the veterans that I talk to about psychedelics, they get to hear about the things that I've dealt with as well. So not only are we talking about psychedelics, but even in the individual one-on-one patient-client space, we're able to develop relationships that have never been possible before.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a real opportunity for authenticity, not only authenticity to the self and being true to yourself, but finding your authentic community that also accepts that. And I think psychedelics is really causing us or giving us that platform, but also allowing us to question. So we're coming up the last 4 minutes. So I want to kind of do more specific questions to what you all are doing. So try to keep it within the minute, and then we'll wrap up. So Kristin, your nonprofit is working with pilots. It was founded by a former Top Gun pilot. What would you like the audience to know about, especially commercial pilots, that they may or may not know? And not trying to freak you out if you're flying home, but this is something why we're so adamant about psychedelics.
Pilots have PTSD too, and a lot of them come from military service. And you think about the long, drawn-out wars that we've had, and that just weighs on you. And you come home and you're depressed, and you have anxiety, and you develop alcoholism. And our military culture doesn't help with that, right? And you think about how dependent our global economy is on safe air travel. It's just staggering to think that the person who is in the front seat of that aircraft is in a place where they cannot be present and they cannot have the empathy and compassion they need to care for the people that they're flying around. So, and just, replace pilot with law enforcement officer or first responder or ER doc or psychiatric nurse, and you see how important it is to take care of these people.
Going on a constant bender with alcohol, the accepted route, or taking psychedelics maybe once a year, right?
It seems like a safer option.
Yeah. Natalie?
Yeah.
Going more into with what you're doing with consulting, and you said some polling and all that. Where do you see the need of? You've worked with like big pharmaceuticals, so in terms of much more of a messaging dynamic, where do you think this is going, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first of all, it's exciting to know that majorities of voters and veterans do support psychedelic assisted therapy. At minimum, 60% support the use of psychedelics of some sort. That support is even higher when you ask about support for veterans using psychedelic assisted therapy. So the level of support, the baseline is high. I am, concerned once the political and regulatory, world starts to talk about this, that it may become a more partisan issue than it currently is. So I think the key thing when we are discussing psychedelic-assisted therapy is to keep the focus on the benefit, on the people who benefit. First and foremost, veterans, are really in dire need of this therapy. And so to talk about psychedelics in the context of veterans is very important, followed by the greater good and who else it can help. Certainly facts and education are important, but that's not what people will immediately jump to and listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Juliana, you have about 50 seconds. You're working in Capitol Hill, pushing for bills that will potentially bring this to the VA. So what's needed from the VA, future of that, and then also federal support funding?
The good news is that we have bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle. So Healing Breakthrough's advocacy team is on the Hill in DC almost every day that our legislators are on the Hill. And for me, as a veteran, using the veteran voice, it's been overwhelming the amount of support that we've gotten from our legislators when we tell them that MDMA-assisted therapy is 67% effective in eliminating post-traumatic stress. They have no choice but to follow the logic and support this. Working with the VA, they are best positioned to be able to roll out a novel treatment, and it's going to benefit our community at large and women that suffer from the highest rate of PTSD.
Real quick, website, how can people follow you, support you?
Healingbreakthrough.org.
And a nonprofit, correct?
Yes.
So you can donate for the MDMA policy. Any website you want to shout out?
bsgco.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn.
And Kristin, last but not least.
NoFallenHeroesFoundation.org, and you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you all so much. HeroicHeartsProject.org. I also want to throw out to Isaac, if you want to support right now, TreatCalifornia.org, another bill there. So all these great organizations are at the front of leading this. If you want to actually be involved or learn more, this is where you can start, as well as the other panel. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for your amazing answers and support.